Good morning, everybody. Today is April 22nd, 2021, and I am here today to talk to you about some really important work and concepts around learning environment teaming to help your district or your school succeed with social emotional learning and academic support, and how to align existing teams, how to make new teams to support your students and your staff. My name is Joe Mahoney. I'm the Director of Mental and Behavioral Health and Social Work Services at Intermediate Unit 1, serving Washington, Greene, and Fayette counties. My committee members who helped me with this presentation, who aren't joining me today, unfortunately, I miss them, are Dr. Loria Waddell, who is the Director of Student Services for Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, and Mary Dolan, who is the Bullying Prevention Consultant at the Office of Safe Schools. So what is a learning environment team? A learning environment team is a group of school and community members at a school that meets regularly and uses decision-based making to support students. So what we're going to be talking about today is what teams are already at your disposal within your school, your district, how to map those teams, how to strengthen those teams, or maybe you're finding a gap and a need for a new team. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to form that new team if you see that that is a need. We're also going to be talking about this decision-making process using data, what that looks like, what that means, and how to make those decisions based on that data to best support your students and your staff. And as we talk about a learning team, a learning environment team, rather, we really want to pose to our districts and to our intermediate units that what learning environment teams you already have in place. We are not asking or recommending that you create a new team. What we want you to do and what we're recommending is that as a district, as a school, you eliminate silos between your teams by examining what existing teams are already in place and where their natural overlaps may occur. Remember, it's about working smarter and not harder through these alignment efforts. So some examples of some teams that you may have within your district or your school: the school climate team, the student support team, an MTSS team, which is a tier 1 team, and we're going to talk about tier 1 in a minute, a PBIS team, an intervention team, which would be tier 2 or tier 3, and again, we'll talk about that in a minute, a leadership team, or a district mental health leadership team. So when we talk about MTSS as a tier 1, we do understand that not every district may title their tier 1 team MTSS, and that is totally fine. You may have an absence of a formal label of MTSS. There may be an absence of a formal MTSS structure. But what's important when we look at the existing teams as we go through team mapping and team alignment or realignment is that a tier 1 team is any team that addresses a universal practice. So practices for all your students, even if it's not labeled MTSS. A tier 2 or tier 3 team could include any team that addresses specific interventions or looks at data. Again, even in the absence of a formal MTSS label or structure, you may still have these teams in place that may not be called MTSS. They may just be called your intervention team, student intervention team. And we look at those teams are a little more specific, a little more student specific, and that's why they're at a tier 2 or tier 3 level. So we did want to point that out because we didn't want to create any confusion or again make anybody work harder in trying to create these tier 1 or tier 2 and tier 3 teams when you already may have them in place. They just might be labeled something different. And the overall goal of the learning environment team is to support the re-entry of students and staff to help ensure their social emotional wellness and academic success. We want to support a strategic process for re-entry, align services using a data-driven process, and foster school partnerships with community leaders, family members, and students. And when we're talking about re-entry here, again, we do understand that all of our school districts have been in some different mode of education this year. Some have been 5 days face-to-face this entire year. Some have been in hybrid. Some have been in virtual. So when we talk about reentry, it's really about wherever you are in that process. So if you've been in a 5-day-a-week face-to-face this whole school year, and that is working and successful for you, we still recommend that you sort of look at this process of teaming, even if you've already re-entered, because again, hopefully, when the pandemic ends officially, and we can get back to school business, even if you have been in 5 days a week face-to-face, it's still going to look a little bit differently moving forward. So we do want to point out what reentry means and what we're talking about when we talk reentry. For some districts, it's complete reentry into the fall. For others, it's not. So regardless of where you are, though, we do recommend still taking a look at your learning environment team. Most schools have multiple teams, and we're going to talk about how to align these learning environment teams to your existing teams so we don't duplicate efforts and we can provide a more streamlined approach to the teams. So we want to examine the alignment of teams. And by doing this, we want to look at what are the objectives of our existing teams, what are the commitments of the existing teams, what resources do those existing teams already have in place, and what risks are those existing teams taking. So by comparing all of these components, we can assess the joint responsibilities as well as where the teams may need to diverge in order to meet their goals. Typically, what is found is that some teams serve multiple purposes, and the alignments of teams can reduce the load on staff by reducing meeting times, streamlining the process for students, and ensuring that the processes are effective. So again, we're really looking at breaking down barriers and silos and working smarter together, not harder. The key considerations to consider when we're talking about team alignment: who is going to lead this alignment process? What's the purpose of the team alignment? How are we defining it? Who will share the outcome of this process, and to whom will the results be shared? Who will decide the number of teams, if the number of teams in the school should be reduced? And who will articulate the overlap, redundancy, or other reasons to eliminate or merge teams? By considering these questions and working through this process, we ensure that your district or your school is meaningfully involving students and families, and ensuring that your teams are multidisciplinary with diverse groups represented, and we have encouragement to have active voices by all the members. Oftentimes, and I think everybody can relate to this, schools and districts have so many teams that you might be wondering why you would need one more. Why do we have to add one more? And why is this one different? I'm sure that's a question going through everybody's minds right now. So when we talk about learning environment teams, they really serve the purpose to coordinate communication, collaboration, and mutual support among team members who might otherwise operate in isolation. So again, those silos, those people who are operating in silos. Learning environment teams also develop a common vision and priorities for improvement to ensure that the educational system is meeting the needs of all students and the larger school community. Learning environment teams can explore how to maximize limited resources to address the wellness needs of students and their families in a strategic manner. So, again, one of the things we saw in an earlier slide, one of the considerations was we want to look at resources of the existing teams. So this is another way to maximize those resources. We know resources are limited. They're limited for many of us. So how do we maximize those resources so we don't have multiple teams sort of vying for the same limited resource? So we really recommend starting this process to see what differentiates this team from other teams is a process of team mapping. When we talk about team mapping, we're recommending that the school or the district at large identify existing teams that are already in place look at the purpose of those teams, and communicate and coordinate efforts of those teams. We want to map teams to existing building and district-wide teams. We want to take an inventory of the team. So who's on the team? What is the team's strategic planning process? We really want to look at the strategic plans of the existing teams. If we are doing an alignment of this new learning environment team to some existing teams, we really want it to be a positive focus. We want it to be a positive learning environment focus when we're looking at this. And we want to look at resource mapping. So, an example of this might be, how are we going to map a team that includes maybe 2 elementary buildings that are strong and your third building who is not as strong? So maybe a district has 3 total elementaries, two have let's say a student support team, and those 2 are firing all cylinders. They're meeting their goals, they're meeting their objectives, they have a great plan. And your third elementary is sitting out there, maybe trying to get something in place, but is unable to be effective in getting it off the ground, or maybe in meetings, or maybe achieving goals that they set out. So that's sort of an example of where the mapping can come in place, because it's really easy to say, oh, well, we have student support teams at all of our elementaries. But then when you, as a district leader or as a school leader, start delving into what that looks like, you may be surprised to find that not all are as strong in their process or their objectives or their goals, and for various reasons: time, staff turnover, changing objectives and goals, administrative turnover. So all those things contribute to that. So when you start breaking it down as a leader, or somebody tasked with this, you may find that there are gaps and there are needs to sort of strengthen and realign your existing teams. Another question that you want to consider is, who's on the team, this positive learning environment team, and how do we select our team members? So when we're selecting our team members, we really recommend that the district or the school communicates the purpose. What is the purpose of this team? What are we looking to achieve? What are we going to gain? How are we going to help our students and our staff through this team? We want to establish clear roles and responsibilities for each team member. So everybody has a voice, everybody has a vested interest, and everybody knows not only what their role is on that team, but what the roles of one another are on that team to work more collaboratively. Each team should have unique goals. So every team that's in place, as we look at these teams, either through team mapping or team realignment or team creation, all the goals should be different. So we wouldn't necessarily want all these district teams to have the same goals, because again, we're just duplicating efforts rather than sort of consolidating the efforts and maximizing the resources and the time. And we want to make sure we have consistent communication between all of our teams. So we want to keep the communication flow open, natural, so that everybody is working together. Some suggested team members when you look at who should be on these teams. Definitely a building level administrator should be on, a building principal, an assistant principal, dean of students, whomever that may be and whatever that looks like. Definitely multidisciplinary teachers. So we want these teachers to represent various grade levels and departments. And we really recommend a teacher who has strong emotional intelligence, who is supportive of students. Now, how do you assess emotional intelligence of your teachers? A lot of times it's going to be very obvious. It's going to be sort of right there on the surface. It's going to be that teacher that the kids seek out, the teacher that helps to de-escalate the students when they're escalated, the teacher who might be in constant collaboration with your guidance departments, your guidance counselors, maybe a teacher who is, the head of your student council, or class sponsor, somebody that's very invested with the students and who the students really rely on. We also recommend school mental health professionals. So your social workers, psychologists, guidance counselors, whomever it may be that you have access to within your school community. Supplemental student support staff. That's a tongue twister. Supplemental student support staff. So this could be maybe a secretary, maybe your paraprofessionals, whomever it is. And again, whomever has that close relationship with the students that the students really rely on and respect and depend upon. Community health and behavioral health providers. So maybe your school district is limited and doesn't necessarily have a social worker or psychologist on staff, but maybe you do contract out with somebody within your community to provide those services as needed. You might want to include them on the team. Professional support staff. Your school nurses. You definitely want to include the school nurses to give that holistic perspective, that overall health perspective. Your non-teaching staff and law enforcement. Your school resource officers, if you have them. Maybe you have a contract with an area police department. So you definitely would want to get those involved. Also, when we talk about teachers, and this is important to mention, you really would want to include your specials teachers, your art, your music, your gym, your chorus, your band. Those are the teachers that catch a lot of times. Those are the teachers who have, while their classes are still structured, they're more engaging, they're more hands-on, they're more interactive. And those teachers pick up and hear a lot through just natural conversation between students within their classes. So they definitely provide valuable input, and we want to make sure that as we look at this multidisciplinary team of teachers, that they're included as well. We also want to look at and think about diversity in our school environment. So maybe we want to include a youth who has lived experience. So maybe a youth that is comfortable and open with discussing. Maybe they have a behavioral health disorder, an emotional health disorder, a learning disorder, whatever it may be. But a youth who has a lived experience. Those would be really, really valuable voices to have on these teams. Likewise, families with lived experience. Maybe we have a family representative who has that same lived experience that can be a voice. Educators who have diverse backgrounds in teaching or diverse sort of personal experiences and professional experiences. While families and youth might not be able to be on teams where individual students are discussed, we still want to encourage and think about how we can have them provide an active voice in a universal learning environment team to positively affect school procedures and routines. And I always tell my staff this, and it's always important to remember that caregivers, whether they're biological parents, guardians, aunts, uncles, whomever it may be, they are the experts on their own children. And we want to encourage their voice as much as possible to provide a perspective within the district, within the community at large. And we want to use them to advocate this process to get other family members to buy in. So that family voice is really important, whatever that looks like. Again, we do understand that there are confidentiality concerns with having family, but maybe you set aside maybe a monthly meeting or a quarterly meeting or whatever it is, where you're not discussing individual students, but you're inviting this family representative in to discuss, the family view of how the process and procedures are going, family concerns that they might be seeing. And again, they're your pipeline to the other family members in the community and in the school. So team members also should avoid using jargons or acronyms and explain any sort of terminology that is not commonly understood by a student or a family member. In education and behavioral health, we have a ton of acronyms and a ton of very technical jargon that we like to throw around. So it's really important to define, what that is if we are using it, so everybody's on the same page. And we want to allow students and families the opportunity to ask questions and to have discussion, so they feel like they're an active part of the decision-making process. Once a school has finished the alignment process, we then want to look at, okay, what are the meeting logistics? who's on the team, when will we meet, what's our purpose. We want to establish the norms of the team, the roles and responsibilities, who's doing what, and what's this communication going to look like? How are we going to communicate with students, staff, and caregivers? So this is one of the, the final steps. Once you've gone through this alignment process, once you've mapped, once you've looked at where your needs are with teaming, once you've identified and assigned or voluntold staff to be on this team, this is the next process. That team needs to get together and immediately set their logistics, set their norms, set their expectations, set the roles and responsibilities. So here are some tips, and this is based on teaming and effective teaming and effective learning in a healthcare setting. And think about a healthcare setting, very similar to a school setting. The team members are busy throughout the day, but they represent all different roles and voices, and they need to communicate quickly and effectively to one another. So try out some of these suggestions that we're going to talk about as you build your teams within the school to help keep the communication efficient and effective. So when we're setting our meeting, keep the meetings brief. Set an agenda ahead of time and stick to that agenda. And I would say, given everybody's limited availability and how busy everybody is within the school setting, no more than 30 minutes. And as a formal team, but again, there could be that daily and that more information sharing once you set aside what that communication will look like once you establish that. But as far as those formal team meetings, keep them brief. Also recommend using huddles. Huddles are time limited. They're very focused on problem solving, and they're very action oriented. So that's a really good opportunity to a really good strategy for engagement and communication. Also try a debrief. Use debriefing in the team meetings. This is going to allow the school team to share, maybe their views on how things are going within the team, and for people to provide feedback on what's successful and maybe what needs to be tightened up and improved. And that's going to happen in real time. And that's an effective way to, again, encourage voice, participation in this team process. And we want to use structured, concise communication and handoff to the next team members. So everybody knows exactly what's expected of them on that team and what they're doing moving forward. So this just could be an example. Maybe your school team, this learning environment team, has decided to meet on Wednesday mornings. Maybe it's from 7:15 to 7:45 before the students get there. And the team norm is that any members of the team can bring up to discuss an issue to discuss before Wednesday if the issue cannot wait. So if it's emergency, if it's something very pressing that we need to get sort of off our minds, off our chest, and relay to other team members, the team norm could be that we can do that. We can always do that through this open communication. So maybe we want to set up an email distribution list to communicate these needs with this team to connect sooner than scheduled meetings. So maybe you want to talk to your IT department and say, can we have a learning environment team? These are the members on it. These are their emails. And that way they can communicate between meetings. We want to avoid focusing on triage and instead use the alignment with MTSS and PBIS. We should also have a management system in place to deal with a crisis situation, and that can come from the MTSS and PBIS alignment. What are the crises? What is the crisis? What's the nature of the crisis? And how are we going to deal and address with that crisis within this team? And we also want to make sure that we recommend that this team establishes a mechanism for communicating these crises or elevated concerns that cannot wait until scheduled meeting times. Again, is that through your email distribution list? Is that through a coded message that everybody sends that maybe means that, hey, we need to have an emergency meeting before Wednesday morning? Whatever it may be, that would be in one of those norms that is established by this team. Suggested professional development as you look at creating this learning environment team or aligning a new team or realigning an existing team, we recommend reaching out to your local intermediate units or Patton for support and professional development. Some of the trainings that can be provided through your intermediate unit or your patent are MTSS trainings, suicide prevention trainings, self-care and compassion fatigue. Being a front line in the education behavioral health system, being a teacher, a nurse, a paraprofessional, an administrator, social worker, counselor, whatever it may be, we do run the risk of compassion fatigue. And we really want to make sure that team is being taken care of with that they are learning about the signs of that and self-care related to that. Also look at trauma-informed approaches in schools. All the IUs and patents will have professional development around that. Bullying prevention, equity and inclusion, and school climate improvement process. So again, we recommend that when you're seeing a need or you're wondering if professional developments might be helpful, reach out to your IUs and or your patents for that. And here is some really helpful literature and resources on teaming. And here is a link to the roadmap for accelerated learning, which is project that we have been working on across the state, which this teaming is part of. So here's a roadmap that includes a lot of other really, really helpful information, trainings, and resources. And here's the development of supporting learning environments. So this is when these trainings are going to go live, and it's all on April 29th. So, we're going to have a lot of really good information for everybody to watch and to view in an asynchronous environment, so you can view it at your own time and your own leisure, and they're quick, but really, really packed with information, with helpful information. And here are some check-in sessions, some collaborative check-in sessions that you would want to attend, to get some good resources, some good ideas, and to brainstorm and connect. And it's really important that you submit your attendance to today's session by using the information that is laid out here. You want to use the Google form, and the link is included. And if you're unable to open that, as we all know, technology sometimes it can fail us when we least expect it. Make sure to use this link to the Google form. And you can also access the attendance form by scanning this QR code with your smartphone. And you'll be directed to the same form. And the exit code is 89634. And again, I thank you all for your time and your participation, your attendance. And if any of us can be of any help or assistance to you as you look at teaming and how to create a positive learning environment team, don't hesitate to reach out.